Now, from Atlanta News First, the issues that matter to you. This is On the Record.
We have some breaking news in the FBI's Fulton County election investigation. More than 200 federal agents now in Georgia to comb through data seized earlier this year, a clear sign that the investigation into the 2020 election is heating up. Thanks so much for joining us for the On the Record podcast. I'm Rick Fulbaum, along with my co-host, Doug Reardon. We have a lot to talk about, Doug, and we're going to start with this investigation in Fulton County because there have been a number of developments over the last several days. Let's go through them real quickly. First of all, we know about these agents that have been sent in. What do we know about exactly what they're looking through and when we're going to hear if they've found anything?
Yeah, we have about 50% of the answers to your questions, Rick. We know that there's this mysterious July 17th deadline that is coming up for these agents to do something. We don't know what. And of course, we still don't know exactly what it is they're looking for. We assume some inaccuracies in these ballots and this data that was seized from these ballot tabulation machines. But this was first reported by the Associated Press in an internal leaked memo from the FBI that was later confirmed to us by members of the Fulton County Commission who had seen it and been briefed on it. 260 FBI agents from field offices around the country were basically called down here to Georgia to review these documents. And one Fulton County commissioner said maybe the biggest thing to come out of this, besides those hard numbers that kind of give us the biggest scope of this investigation so far, is the fact that they're coming here to review these documents. What that tells us is these ballots, or at least a lot of these documents where we had no idea where they were for a long time,
They're still here.
Are in fact here in Georgia. They never left. We saw them getting loaded onto those at Renton Enterprise box trucks and FBI pickups that were there that day back in January. We had no idea what happened to them after that, but there are clearly many of them somewhere here in Georgia. So these 200 plus agents will come down, review this. There is that July 17th deadline. And again, we heard from a commissioner. They don't know what's going to happen, but they know that something's going to happen because the government isn't in the habit of just arbitrarily setting deadlines for federal agencies. So presumably they will be combing over these documents, these ballots, looking for inaccuracies, and they don't have very long to do it now.
But this is not a court-imposed deadline. It's a self-imposed deadline from the government itself, which is interesting, I think. Another development this week it has to do with the personal information, names and phone numbers and email addresses of the 2020 election workers in Fulton County. That's something that the government wanted to get their hands on. And now we know that that's not going to happen.
Yeah, they were very strongly rebuffed by a judge here in the area. And he did not mince words at all when he said this is unnecessary, it's a bit overreaching, and rejected that subpoena, which doesn't happen. A lot of times federal subpoenas, just look at the raid back in January. You know, they had the wrong address on that subpoena. They very quickly got the address changed, and then they had their ability to go in and seize these documents. So all that to say that it is very difficult it is very odd, I should say, for a judge to reject the federal subpoena because they hold a lot of weight. And of course, as you mentioned, this one was seeking all the personal information of the hundreds, maybe thousands of election workers and poll workers, even some volunteers that worked the polls back in 2020. It was looking for their addresses, their names, lots of personally identifying information. And the judge said, can't see why you would need this, not to mention the statute of limitations for that is well past. And so on those two grounds, he rejected that subpoena, and the Department of Homeland Security will just have to find a new way to do this, or Department of Justice, excuse me. And so, I think this was viewed as a very big win for Fulton County. They have not had a lot of those when it comes to this case in recent months. And so they were very happy that they were able to kind of stand in the gap between the Department of Justice, very powerful agency, and their poll workers, many of them, again, volunteers. But it could be a short-lived win. If we know one thing about the Department of Justice, it is that they have tried many, many different avenues to get what they want out of Fulton County over the years.
And we should mention that the judge who ruled against the government is a Trump-appointed judge. So not some someone who maybe was appointed by a Democratic
The
leader who
the
would,
commissioner we talked to said he wasn't a wacko liberal, so
yeah.
she hoped that would resonate with some of the folks who still have their skepticism about that election.
And all of this stems from the president's skepticism about the election. He has been saying since 2020 that he lost the election because it was rigged, and he has pointed to the results in Fulton County, Georgia, as one of the main reasons why he lost the state of Georgia. He has claimed that there was fraud here in Georgia on a massive scale, to the extent that it would change the results here in our state. That has never been proved, though. The president has made these claims without really any evidence.
Right. I think every political reporter in Georgia hears the number 11,780 in their heads, right? That was the margin, and that's always stayed the margin. I think there were a number of votes when the secretary went back and did that limiting audit. There were 3 human errors that warranted looking into. So by no means has there been any evidence that's been put forward. There's been a lot of skepticism about the systems that have been used, and of course, we've seen as recently as just a couple of weeks ago, back in the special session, lawmakers take steps to address some of these criticisms and skepticisms of our voting systems and softwares. But certainly no one, to my knowledge, has ever come forward with any credible evidence to show that the results of the election should have been switched here in Georgia back in 2020.
And speaking of elections here in Georgia and the law that was recently passed to change the way that our votes here are tabulated using those QR codes, there was an audit that was conducted by the Secretary of State's office here in Georgia this week, which found that, in fact, hand-counted ballots, there were more inaccuracies when the ballots were hand-counted than they were when they were tabulated by the computer.
Yeah, and I think that people should put a lot of stock into that because, again, just last week we had 3 clerks from very different parts of the metro area on, and they essentially said the same thing. They were like, look, it's not our favorite. We'll do it if we have to, but we really like the machine system because it is accurate. And that is, again, what has been kind of befuddling to some of these clerks is the skepticism over the system that has worked for many, many years, has shown very few signs, if any, of, inaccuracy. And so, yeah, I think there was definitely a little irony. And in reading Secretary Raffensperger, who is no friend of the MAGA movement, mind you, in reading his release on this, you could kind of tell where he sat on what might be to come in the future of Georgia elections. I don't think that he is someone who necessarily wants to see the state switch over to a full hand-marked, hand-counted paper ballot system. And this just goes to show that you got to be careful about how you do this. You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right, when it comes to this. And so I think the lawmakers sitting on that committee that will pick the next tabulation system should be very, very in tune with the results of this release put out by the Secretary of State.
Well, coming up this Sunday on The Record, we will be speaking with the Fulton County Chairman, Rob Pitts. He'll be joining us in the studio to talk about all the latest developments regarding the FBI's investigation and the efforts on his part and the county's part to combat these allegations and this investigation that's being carried out by the FBI and the Department of Justice. So we'll look forward to hearing what the chairman has to say later on today. Another story that we're going to be talking about and that everybody's been talking about over the last several days now is the Maine Senate race. And I'll tell you why we here in Georgia are interested in all of this, because obviously there is a very narrow margin of majority in the U.S. Senate when it comes to Republican rule. And if the Democrats are able to pick up 4 Republican-held seats that are currently up for election this November, they could conceivably flip the U.S. Senate. One of those seats that they are hoping to flip is Maine, and we just found out really within the last 24 hours or so that the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate race in that state, a guy by the name of Graham Plattner, has dropped out of the race after accusations that he sexually assaulted a woman. And there have been a number of accusations in the media over the last couple of weeks, but this was sort of the last nail in the coffin, so to speak. And he has announced that he's going to withdraw his candidacy, leaving the Democrats, at this point anyway, without a candidate, and making the Georgia Senate race, where John Ossoff is defending his seat for the first time, even more vitally important for the Democrats to hold on to.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, it was already an incredibly razor thin margin that the Democrats were dealing with in the first place. And it didn't even include, a flip here in Georgia. It included a retention. Ossoff has to keep that seat in order for that math to work out. And of course, things didn't get easier for them in Maine. But I think what really is kind of the next step for the larger Democratic outlook on this is, how do you replace Planter? How do you get someone new into that role of running again? Because there were a lot of people, and mind you, there were a lot of Democrats in Georgia back in 2024 who were very upset with the way that Joe Biden was replaced, where there was really no, and these aren't just like random people we talked to on the streets. These are delegates of the party that we talked to at the Democratic National Convention, who even then on that week still had concerns about how the party had gone about replacing a major candidate that stood to run a race with major implications. And so I think if I had any advice for the Democrats, it would be to kind of crowdsource for a replacement here in this race and kind of figure out, what do the actual members of the party want? Not the brass, not the higher ups, and not, there's really no playbook for something like this, right? But I think you really have to do a lot of getting in touch with your voters and getting in touch with your base to find out, how this is going to work. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to put a Democrat in the Senate in Maine. And so I think the larger party here has to do a lot of listening to their voters in Maine before they make any moves.
And they don't have a lot of time. They've got a deadline according to their rules in Maine as far as replacing a candidate on the ballot. They've got really a couple of weeks, if that, to find someone and to get that person nominated somehow. And there are no rules for how to do it, because it's sort of unprecedented in the state of Maine. So they're kind of making it up as they go along. But I think that your point is well taken, that they really do need to survey and make sure that everybody is on the same page as best they can. And I've been reading about talks to try to convene some kind of a Democratic convention in the state of Georgia where they could get delegates together and have them vote on a nominee as quickly as they can to get somebody on the ballot here who would go up against Susan Collins, who is a longtime Republican, a moderate Republican, but someone who the Democrats feel is potentially vulnerable right now in this midterm election, when Democrats feel that they perhaps have the upper hand when it comes to a lot of these races. We have a president whose approval numbers are way down. We have a war that has just flamed up again that is very unpopular, and gas prices and inflation prices and affordability issues still on the table. So an opportunity for Democrats. Is it one that they're going to blow in Maine? We'll have to wait and see, but we're watching here. And so are the Senate candidates in our state, Jon Ossoff, as we mentioned, and Mike Collins, who is the Republican challenger to Jon Ossoff. Collins, someone who just this week we learned has changed his chief of staff for the third time in recent months, which a lot of Democrats are saying, they're pointing the finger at this, saying that this is a sign of a real instability within the Collins camp, that this is someone who is not able to pick and maintain quality people and surround himself with quality individuals. So he's got a number of issues that Democrats are trying to point to as they try to boost the chances of Jon Ossoff to being able to successfully defend this seat.
Yeah, it's a clear line of attack. I mean, it's an easy, low-hanging fruit line of attack for the Ossoff campaign. I mean, does Collins have a personnel problem? Absolutely. And even Republicans will admit that and tell you that and get on the phone and tell us that, because this is someone they desperately want to win this seat. And you can't do that if you're constantly being distracted by tweets that your staff is popping off, mocking sexual assault victims. So this is clearly an issue for the Collins campaign. Not only have they replaced their chief of staff, as you mentioned, not once, not twice, three times now. Collins had, kind of handpicked that staff. And there were a lot of known instigators on it. People like Brandon Phillips, who was fired over that tweet that I just mentioned. And even folks like one of his former chiefs of staff who, it came out recently had been texting with some folks to try and get a Holocaust denier out of jail, and saying that he was going to use the power of his office as, someone who worked in a sitting congressman's legislative arm to try and do that. So he's got to rein this in if Collins wants to have, a real shot at this and wants to take away probably the through line of the Ossoff attack, then he's got to figure out his personnel issues. It's not a difficult thing to do. I should note, just, I guess this is why we do this, to give people kind of this perspective. I've talked to a lot of members of the Collins campaign. Many of them are very lovely, competent, capable people, who, have been very forward and honest with us. But I think every campaign is going to have some bad seeds. Collins just seems to have a lot of them. Not to mention 2 open house ethics investigations as well, that have to do with his staff. So this is a problem. I mean, it's clearly an issue, and just wait. Ossoff attack ads will be rolling these accusations certainly into, I think, their overall attacks on Collins.
Well, we're very interested in this race, of course, and we can happily report that Senator Ossoff has accepted our invitation to have a debate on Atlanta News First and Gray Media. We have not yet gotten any kind of confirmation from the Collins camp yet. And just within the last couple of days, we've learned that Rick Jackson, who is the Republican candidate for governor, has accepted Atlanta News First's invitation to a town hall style debate to be hosted by Gray Media and WANF. And so we have not yet heard from the Bottoms campaign whether they have agreed to accept our invitation. But, we do have a couple of candidates in those 2 marquee races, one Democrat, one Republican, stepping up and accepting our invitation to come and debate and talk about the issues that are facing Georgia voters.
Yeah, we got some stuff in the works. It's good. I think everyone should do it. I'm biased, right? But I think everyone should take every opportunity they can to speak to voters. And this is a great way to do it. Not only are we excited that we've gotten some response from these candidates, but we've gotten a Democrat to commit. We've gotten a Republican to commit, just in opposite races. And I think that shows that both parties, at least some of the candidates in those parties, recognize just how much of an opportunity this is for their campaign to be able to get on there for a long time and speak to voters about these issues and face questions in this town hall format. Maybe, some of these questions are things that may swing some voters onto their side. So
That's right.
I think that it's a very valuable thing for every candidate. Again, showing my bias here, but if any of them are listening, just commit. We'll have a good time.
You know our numbers. You know how to reach us. Give us a call.
Time.
Let's wrap this up by talking about a major win when it comes to Atlanta and the job that it has done hosting the World Cup matches. We still have one more match to go next week, but I really think that by and large, a lot of people are feeling real good about how Atlanta has fared as a host city during this World Cup. We were the host of one of the most exciting soccer games, I think, in the history of the World Cup, the Argentina game, with Lionel Messi and his teammates coming from behind and winning that match last week. We could see Messi again, depending on the results of some upcoming games. He could be one of the players taking the pitch at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, known as Atlanta Stadium, when we have that match coming up next week. But really, this has just been, I think going in, there was a lot of people were a little concerned that maybe we would not be able to step up to the plate, the city of Atlanta, that is, when it comes to transportation, with public transportation with MARTA, when it comes to the fan festival that was held and still being held at Centennial Olympic Park. But really from what I'm hearing, officials here in the city and even people from around the world who have come to Atlanta for these matches really cannot say enough positive things about the experiences that they've had here in Atlanta.
Yeah, the hand wringing before this was off the chain. It was wild. I think back to about a year before this tournament came, sitting down with at the time president of the city council, Doug Shimon, who was very blunt and said, "We're not ready right now. We're not. We don't have MARTA ready to go. I don't know if our public transportation or even our public infrastructure is ready to support this." Think about that whole Centennial Yards, formerly known as the Gulch area, right? There were still hotels going up about 2 weeks before the games kicked off. So kudos. Straight up kudos to the city for getting this ready, and the county at that, and the state. But these are not easy to pull off. As we just got off the phone with DHS Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen this morning, and we were talking to him about ICE and DHS's role and the safety of all these matches around the country. And he was like, every single match is a Super Bowl. You got like 40 Super Bowls that you gotta, work with states and cities and counties on to keep people safe. And he even the DHS secretary talking about these mostly liberal cities was saying we had great communication. I hope this is a model for the future. Atlanta in particular was fantastic to work with, and so I think that the key here was just the federal, state, county, local communication and coordination that went on. You can't knock the guy for saying it. It's a great model when everything works together. Of course, it's soccer, right? There wasn't a whole lot to get on the same page about. It's fun and it's good economically for the city, and everybody knows that. But I think it is a good microcosm of what can happen when you see all the levels of coordination working together in government. Maybe something to keep in mind for the future. But I think everyone should be very proud of themselves. I know MARTA had its issues. We had a federal investigation launched into MARTA in the middle of the tournament, so that wasn't great. But things, held up pretty well. And I think the thing that will be interesting now to see after we're done on Wednesday or Thursday moving forward is what are the economic numbers? Because we were expecting, I can't remember the exact number to be frank, but, multi millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars coming into the city in economic boost because of this tournament. Will that actually pan out? We will have to see.
We certainly will, and we'll be watching. And of course, there's one more match to go, so we don't want to count our chickens here. But so far, so good. And let's hope for a rousing and safe and exciting finish to the World Cup, both here in Atlanta and around the country, and in Canada and in Mexico as well, as we head towards that final, which will be held in New Jersey later on this month. So again, we've got the interview with Mark Wayne Mullen that you just teased. We'll hear from him this Sunday on the record. We also talked about the interview with Rob Pitts. We've got two real great newsmakers who are going to be coming on the program. We also have expert analysis, as always, from our panel, both from the right and the left, fair and balanced. So join us this Sunday at 11 for On the Record with me and Doug and the entire team here. Until then, thanks so much for joining us here on the Companion Podcast, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for watching A&F Plus. For more breaking news, live coverage, and your community stories, download the Atlanta News First app. You can also watch us on YouTube, Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. To join the conversation on YouTube Live, visit our channel and hit subscribe. You can also listen to the Atlanta News First podcast by searching Atlanta News First on your preferred listening platform.